and our first speaker is Roger Anderton. He comes from United Kingdom, and he is a member of Alternative Natural Philosophy Association, and he is independent scientist. So please present us your work about Roger Boscovich.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me give this talk. So, my talk is about the unification process, and so basically just going to remind you the sort of unification that Newton made, and I'm then going to explain the unification that Boscovich made, which carried on after Newton, and what Boscovich says Newton gets forgotten about when you teach physics. So what I've been doing is I've been trying to translate Boscovich's work into English, because a lot of it's still in Latin, and the reason I've come to this is because I was interested in what Einstein was doing, and I looked into what was the unified field theory, research into that, and I found that the basis for that sort of research was really Boscovich, although it's a bit obscure in the writings, literature on the subject, but that's what the basis for it was. And my way of looking at things is mainly to come at things from a historical perspective. So when they teach this sort of thing, the usual way is to start at the beginning, and you start with the ancient Greeks, and that's the basis for Western science. So I think that's Pythagoras there. So I'm going to jump over all of that and just get straight to the bit where Newton came in. And so I'm dealing with these two issues of unification. There's a lot of background before Newton about atoms and so forth, when the ancient Greeks thought about the atoms, but I'm just going to deal with Newton. So Newton's big unification was about his apple, and it's a fairly famous story, but nobody really knows whether it happened or not. But the story is that an apple falling to the ground is following the same laws of physics, the same laws of motion as what the moon is. So there's a unification between the motion of the apple and the motion of the moon. And that's the big unification. And when you think about it, that sounds fairly obvious, that the motion of the apple and the motion of the moon are the same, but that's because we're looking at it from our way of looking at it. Before Newton, there was a lot of things in science, mainly from Aristotle, and you had all this idea of the Earth as the centre of the universe, and the planets going around it, and the natural place for the Earth was the centre, above it was the air, and above that the fire. That's all the natural places. So it was, Newton was giving a different way of thinking about physics to what was then the existing way of thinking about it. So it was quite a change. So according to Newton, what you have is particle objects, and they attract each other through gravity, and it acts through the centre of gravity. So you've got the centre there, and the centre there, and the distance apart, and that's where the force is operating through. So what exactly is meant by the centres of gravity, and I'm going to pass on that, is a bit of a mystery, but I'm hopping on to a greater mystery. The greater mystery is, how does gravity act through empty space? And what they used to call that, they called that an occult force, and occult means hidden. And things were operating at action at a distance. How was things how is force acting between the Earth and the Moon when there's no contact? What you normally think of is things like billiard balls. So billiard balls, they hit each other at sort of like a contact force, and then they come apart. So there's contact. But what you've got with the action at this distance is no contact. So there's two types of motion, the Moon's motion and the Apple's motion, but you left a mystery about it. How is there contact forces versus there's non-contact forces? So why is there two different types of forces? He unified the types of motion, but you had the mystery of why there was a difference between these two types of forces. So, so how does gravity act without contact? And it seems disunified to have these two different types of forces. So it was this person, Boscovich, who then made the next unification. And his answer was, there's no such thing as contact forces. The only type of force is no contact. There's no contact happening. So there's no contact force and non-contact forces being different. There's only just one force and there's no contact. So it acts like the illusion of sawing the woman in half. What we see is, in this illusion, is the woman being sawn in half, but we know that's not what's going on. And so our perceptions of physical reality are the same thing. When we see two billiard balls coming together, we think there's contact happening. That's what our senses are telling us, but that's not what's happening. There's a physical reality beyond what our senses are telling us. And so that was the unification that Boscovich was telling us, that our senses are not telling us what the real physical reality is. So, all the physical reality in Boscovich is it's made out of point particles. Our senses don't see the point particles, and that's behind what our senses are telling us. It's like the illusion between a woman being sawn in half. So when you've got a point particle there, what you have around it is a field of force. And so it's like what they kind of portray in films like The Matrix, where their reality was really a computer simulation, where everything's made out up on the computer and called virtual reality. So even though at the beginning he was living like he thought he was in the real world, behind what his senses told him, the real world was a computer simulation. So with Boscovich, it's the same sort of thing. So I think there's sort of a psychological issue with people. They've had a problem that they've not been able to cope with this idea that physical reality is point particles, and so they instantly reject the idea. And it could be one of the reasons that Boscovich found difficulty with getting acceptance at the end of his life. And also another issue seems to be that Einstein overshadowed what Boscovich did. So with Boscovich, you've got this psychological issue of people are instantly opposed to the idea that what their senses are telling them is not what's really happening behind physical reality. And so I've been trying to communicate this about Boscovich to modern physicists, and what I seem to observe is they know about Newton, they know about the apple, they know about Newton's unification, but the then miss out what happened in the 18th century. They jump straight to Einstein's revolution in physics, and they forget everything that happened in the 18th century. Sometimes they would talk about point particles, but they won't know what theory that comes from. They don't know the theory in which point particles is in the context of. So what you've got, Boscovich in the 18th century worked out this theory of physics based on point particles, and they forget to tell you that when they educate you in physics. They do talk about point particles, but they don't tell you what theory it's coming from. And so they miss out all this physical reality is different to your senses. And that's quickly my talk. I'm going to talk quickly so that Dragoslav will then go into the complicated details. I've got the translation of his book here. I'm selling a few copies if it's interested. Thank you.